Hey YouTube, this is Primetime Pokemon. In this video, I'll be reviewing my Greninja BREAK Deck. Now this is another competitive TCG deck review that I'm doing for the 2018 Standard Format. In the description of this video, you'll find a link to the playlist I've created for these types of deck review videos. So this video is going to be laid out the same as my other deck review videos. The beginning, I'll give an overview of this deck. The middle part of the video, I'll show the deck checklist, and then the third part of this video, and a majority of this video, I'll go through each and every card in this deck, stating why the card is in the deck, as well as how I use that card. You'll also find a deck checklist in the description of this video. As far as general strategy goes with this deck, the ideal way to set up this deck is to get Froakie in the active Pokemon spot to start the game, evolve it into Frogadier your second turn, then use its move to get as many Frogadier on your bench as possible. That way, you can potentially set up multiple Greninja BREAK. Greninja BREAK has an ability on the card that allows you to do 60 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. And the only catch with this ability is that Greninja BREAK has to be in the active Pokemon spot. Now Greninja does have a free retreat cost, so you can potentially do 120 total damage with 2 Greninja BREAK cards and then also attack with Greninja. The whole key to this deck is to have Starmie set up on the bench. That way you can always make sure and have energy in your hand, because the ability on Greninja BREAK makes you discard one water energy card from your hand to do 60 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. Something a little bit different about this deck is that I include a Tapu Fini GX, only for its GX attack. If my opponent has something set up in their active Pokemon spot, and it does take me a little bit longer to get Greninja in the active Pokemon spot, I can move Tapu Fini into the active Pokemon spot, use its GX attack, and have my opponent shuffle their active Pokemon back into their deck, including all cards attached to that Pokemon. So if they're using something like a Duskmane Necrozma, Gardevoir GX, anything that has a lot of energy on it, or takes a couple of turns to set up if it is an evolution Pokemon, that is a great time to use Tapu Fini GX's attack. And although this deck is a little bit older, a lot of these cards are from the Breakpoint set, this is one of my favorite decks that I've built so far. A big advantage here is that there are not any GX or EX cards for the most part outside of Espeon and Tapu Fini, which I really do not use much. That way, when your opponent knocks out something like Greninja BREAK, they only can take one prize card instead of 2. As you can see, the deck checklist is on the screen now. 20 total Pokemon in this deck, so a little bit more than some other decks that I built on my channel. The main attacker in this deck is Greninja. The other Pokemon are really for support, and really just have a specific role in this deck, not really attacking. Trainer cards, 30 total. I only use 3 different supporter cards, all for getting more cards into my hand. I only use 10 energy in this deck, 4 special energy and splash energy. So as you can see with the item cards, I use a couple of different cards to help get specific cards from my discard pile back into my hand or deck. So I'll take a look at the Pokemon in this deck first. 20 total Pokemon. Started off with the main line in the deck: Froakie, Frogadier, Greninja, and Greninja BREAK. I use 4 copies of Froakie. This is from the Breakpoint set. 60 HP on the card, which is a solid HP. Just one move called Bubble. For 1 water energy, if you get a heads when flipping a coin, the defending Pokemon is paralyzed. So if you are forced to go second during the game, you can attack your very first turn and paralyze the defending Pokemon, allowing Froakie another turn to get set up and make sure it is not knocked out the first time your opponent can attack. Next up, Frogadier. This is also from the Breakpoint set. 4 copies of this card. It does have a low HP of only 70, but the main reason you want to use this card is because of its move, Water Duplicates. For 1 water energy card, it says, search your deck for up to 3 Frogadier and put them onto your bench. Shuffle your deck afterward. So this is a quick way to get Frogadier set up on your bench and really skip over Froakie and the basic evolution form in this line. So that's what I always try and do to start a game. Go Froakie into Frogadier and the first time it can attack, use water duplicates. Greninja is next. 4 copies of this Greninja. This is also from the Breakpoint set. A little bit lower HP, only 130, but both moves on this card require only 1 energy, and this card does have a free retreat cost. So this first move is Shadow Stitching. For 1 colorless energy, it does 40 damage. And then it says, until the end of your opponent's next turn, each Pokemon your opponent has in play in his or her hand and in his or her discard pile has no abilities. So this can come in handy quite often. A lot of decks out there utilize abilities from the bench or try and play something like Tapu Fini GX. So if your opponent is already struggling, you can go ahead and use Shadow Stitching instead of Moonlight Slash just to prolong their suffering and really not help them out at all. That way you can continue to set up your Pokemon while your opponent cannot use any of their abilities at all. I actually use Shadow Stitching quite a bit, and I try and spread damage around with Greninja Break. And then if I am trying to knock out a Pokemon in one move, Moonlight Slash is the move to use. For 1 water energy card, this move does 60 damage plus 20 more damage if you decide to return a water energy from Greninja to your hand. You can attach a choice band to this card, and then it can do 110 damage in 1 turn. And then you can add that 120 damage if you have 2 Greninja Breaks set up. And this card can do 230 damage in 1 turn and really knock out any GX or EX card out there. And then here's a look at Greninja Break. 3 copies of this card. This is also from the Breakpoint set. The way break cards work is you set these horizontally on the card it evolves from. It increases its HP, so Greninja would have an HP of 170, and it adds an ability. You then can use the moves on Greninja as well as its free retreat cost. So Giant Water Shuriken says, once during your turn, if this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, you may discard a water energy card from your hand. If you do, put 6 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. So I try and have 2 of these set up. That way, I have 1 in the active Pokemon spot to start. I use the ability on this card, I retreat it for free, and then I put the other Greninja Break in and do another 60 damage. That way I can do 230 damage total. If I use Moonlight Slash, I have a choice band attached to Greninja Break, and I'm attacking an EX or a GX card. But that line is the only main attacker I have in this deck. It can really dole out a lot of damage, and the disadvantage in this deck is if Starmie is knocked out, or if you cannot get Greninja or Greninja Break set up, this deck really isn't that powerful. But again, when these cards are knocked out, your opponent only gets to take 1 prize card, so this deck does give you some time to get these cards set up. Next up is the 1/1 line of Staryu and Starmie. Now this Staryu from the Breakpoint set has a very low HP, but it does have a free retreat cost, so that is useful. You always try and put a card that has a free retreat cost into the active Pokemon spot. That way you can retreat it for free and put whatever card you want into the active Pokemon spot during your turn. And then I can also go and get this card with Brooklet Hill. And then Starmie here is really the most important card in this deck. If this card is knocked out, you are going to be in trouble. So Starmie from the Evolution set, 90 HP, which is solid, but I really never attack with this card. The main reason I have this card in the deck is for its ability, Space Beacon. Once during your turn, you may discard a card from your hand. If you do, put 2 basic energy cards from your discard pile into your hand. So this works hand in hand with Greninja Break and its ability. You need water energy cards in your hand to use Greninja Break's ability, and then you have to discard those water energy cards to do damage. So you can discard 2 water energy cards each turn to do 120 damage with 2 Greninja Break, and then the next turn, or that very same turn, you can discard 1 card from your hand and go and get those water energy cards you just discarded. So this card really guarantees that you can have water energy in your hand to use Greninja Break's ability. Next up here would be Tapu Fini GX. This is the only GX card in this deck, and the main reason I use this card is for its GX attack. This is from the Burning Shadows set. It has a little bit lower HP of only 170, but its GX attack, Tapu Storm, says the following. Shuffle your opponent's active Pokemon and all cards attached to it into their deck. If your opponent has no bench Pokemon, this attack does nothing. So like I mentioned in the open of this video, this card is very important. If your opponent gets one specific card set up very quickly, you can then go use Brooklet Hill, get Tapu Fini GX on your bench, retreat Greninja for free, for example, put Tapu Fini GX into the active Pokemon spot, and use its GX attack. You don't have to worry about trying to use some other GX attack because this is the only GX in the deck. And then Aqua Ring and Hydro Shot can also be used. Aqua Ring does 20 damage for one energy card. You may switch Tapu Fini GX with one of your bench Pokemon. And then Hydro Shot for 3 energy cards does 120 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. However, you must discard 2 water energy from this Pokemon. So Tapu Fini, like Greninja Break, can attack any of your opponent's Pokemon. So if you want to add some energy cards over time to Tapu Fini, it isn't a bad secondary attacker. Espeon EX is next. This is from the Breakpoint set. I just used one Espeon EX. HP of 170, and the main reason I use this card is for its Miraculous Shine move. For 1 colorless energy, it says devolve each of your opponent's evolved Pokemon and put the highest stage evolution card on it into your opponent's hand. So if I'm not knocking out Pokemon with Greninja Break's ability, I can spread that 60 damage around. A lot of basic evolution form Pokemon have 60 HP or less, so I can use a couple of Greninja Break, get that damage spread around, and then use Espeon EX's Miraculous Shine move to devolve those Pokemon and potentially knock out more than one Pokemon at once. And then the final Pokemon here would be Tapu Lele GX. I only use one Tapu Lele GX in this deck. The main reason to use this card is because of its ability, Wonder Tag. It allows you to search your deck for a supporter card and put it into your hand. This is from the Guardians Rising set. The reason that I use only one Tapu Lele GX is because Greninja has a free retreat cost. You're not going to have to get Guzma into your hand or hope to find some float stones, that type of thing. Also, a lot of the cards in this deck require only 1 water energy to attack. So I'm not as dependent in this deck on getting supporters into my hand. Plus, all the supporters I do use in this deck draw cards. So with 11 supporter cards in this deck, I'm more than likely going to have a supporter in my hand that I want to use each and every turn. So that is it for the Pokemon in the deck. I can show the trainer cards now. So there are 30 total trainer cards in this deck. I can show the supporter cards first. I only use 11 supporter cards in this deck. 3 different supporter cards total. So first up here would be Cynthia. This is from the Ultra Prism set. In my opinion, this is the best supporter in the 2018 Standard Format right now. 4 copies of this card. It says, shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw 6 cards. So the advantage here is it does not affect your opponent's hand, and then it always gets 6 cards into your hand. I used 4 copies of Supporter N. This is from the Fates Collide set. It says, each player shuffles his or her hand into his or her deck, then each player draws a card for each of his or her remaining prize cards. So similarly to Cynthia, this can get a maximum of 6 cards into your hand, and then it also affects your opponent's hand. So if they are winning a battle and only have 1 or 2 prize cards left, you can use this card to limit the number of cards they can get into their hand. And then Professor Sycamore is the final supporter. 3 copies of this card. It says discard your hand and draw 7 cards. This is from the Breakpoint set. The reason I only use 3 of this card is because it discards cards. I'm already discarding a lot of cards when I use Greninja Break's ability as well as Starmie's ability. So I don't want to discard too many cards and therefore lose the game by running out of cards in my deck. But with this card, I can potentially discard Water Energy and then get those back with Starmie. I can also discard Pokemon and get those back with things like Super Rod as well as Rescue Stretcher. On to the item cards now, as well as tool cards and stadium cards. First up would be Ultra Ball. 4 copies of this card. This is a staple in a lot of decks out there. This card helps get a specific Pokemon into your hand. Like I said, I want to use Frogadier the second turn of the game so that I can get more Frogadier set up on the bench. It's also important to go and get Starmie or Greninja Break. 4 copies of this card. I also use 4 copies of Evo Soda. This card is from the Generation set. It says, search your deck for a card that evolves from one of your Pokemon and put it onto that Pokemon. And this counts as evolving that Pokemon. So a lot of evolution Pokemon in this deck, from Starmie to all of the evolution forms in the Greninja line. So this is an important way to get those evolution Pokemon. And it is an item card, so you can use more than 1 Evo Soda per turn and get multiple Pokemon set up. Field Blower is next. 3 copies of this card. It says, choose up to 2 in any combination of Pokemon Tool cards and Stadium cards in play and discard them. This is from the Guardians Rising set. This card you mainly want to discard things like Floatstone and then other Stadium cards. It isn't as important to discard Choice Band cards just because there's really not that many GX or EX cards in this deck. Field Blower is also useful for getting rid of things like Parallel City, reducing the number of cards that you can have on your bench. And then the only Stadium card in this deck would be Brooklet Hill. I use 2 copies of this card. It's from the Guardians Rising set and says, once during each player's turn, that player may search their deck for a basic water Pokemon or basic fighting Pokemon, put it onto their bench, and shuffle their deck. So I use this card specifically to go after Staryu, Froakie, and Tapu Fini GX. I use 2 copies of Choice Band in this deck. This is from the Guardians Rising set. It says, the attacks of the Pokemon this card is attached to do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon GX or active Pokemon EX. Like I mentioned, you can attach this to Greninja Break and do 110 damage with the move on Greninja. Add that to the 120 damage you can hopefully do with 2 Greninja Break, and you can really knock out majority of the Pokemon out there in 1 turn. And then I use 2 copies of Enhanced Hammer. Like I mentioned, sometimes this deck is a little bit slower to set up, so a lot of times your opponent will put a double colorless energy on one of their Pokemon. You can use this card, which is from the Guardians Rising set, to limit how fast they set up their cards and really prevent them from attacking if they can't attach another special energy card to their Pokemon. I use 1 Rescue Stretcher in this deck. This is also from the Guardians Rising set. It allows you to get cards from your discard pile into your hand or back into your deck. It has 2 options, either put 1 card from your discard pile into your hand or shuffle 3 Pokemon from your discard pile into your deck. So like I mentioned, you can specifically discard cards with Ultra Ball or Professor Sycamore and get those back with this card. You can also get those cards back with Super Rod. This is from the Breakthrough set. It says, shuffle 3 in any combination of Pokemon and basic energy cards from your discard pile into your deck. So that puts all of the cards back into your deck. I mainly use this to get Pokemon back into my deck just because I want those water energy cards in the discard pile. Last up here would be the energy cards. 10 total energy I use in this deck. I use 4 splash energy and 6 water energy. Now 10 energy cards may seem a little bit light, but it is important to remember that Greninja has a free retreat cost and a majority of the Pokemon in this deck require only 1 energy card to attack. First up here would be Splash Energy, 4 copies of this card. It is from the Breakpoint set. Essentially, this can only be attached to a water type Pokemon, and if the Pokemon this card is attached to is knocked out, you can return all the Pokemon from that line back into your hand. So that way, if you have multiple Frogadier set up on your bench, for example, and you have Greninja in the active Pokemon spot with Splash Energy, it gets knocked out. You can then move Greninja, Frogadier, and Froakie back into your hand, and then immediately evolve one of your Frogadier on your bench into Greninja. So it is important in a heavy evolution deck like this one to have Splash Energy. And then I use 6 copies of Water Energy. Again, I try and use Water Energy to do damage with the ability on Greninja Break, and then I can get those energy cards back with Starmie. For the most part, I try and attach Splash Energy to Greninja for attacking, but if my opponent does use Enhanced Hammer, I'm going to have to use Water Energy, just the basic form. But for the most part, I haven't had any trouble with the amount of energy here. I always seem to have enough energy in my hand to attack. So that is really it with this deck. You can see the deck checklist on the screen again. And like I said, this is a very fun deck to play with. It is a little bit older, so you've probably seen this deck checklist out there before. I added Cynthia, of course, and I really like the addition of Tapu Fini GX. But this deck, once set up, a couple of Greninja Break are in play. You can do major damage every single turn. I really like the fact that I can knock out one of my opponent's Pokemon and still have a regular attack to use on Greninja. So it can really frustrate an opponent, and it can really limit how fast they can set up their Pokemon, just because if they put a basic Pokemon on their bench, you can quickly knock out that Pokemon with Greninja Break. I would say the one main weakness in this deck would be that if an opponent has Guzma, they can easily switch Starmie into the active Pokemon spot and knock it out. Like I said, Starmie is the glue to this deck. Without Starmie, you really can't do as much damage each and every turn. And then, of course, this deck is weak to Grass-type Pokemon, so things like Golisopod GX and Tapu Bulu GX, as well as Leafeon GX, you're going to be weak to. But there you have it. Thanks, everyone, for watching. As always, before you go, make sure and check out all the links in the description of this video, including links to my blog, Facebook, and Twitter pages. If you have any deck suggestions for me to do in the future, please let me know. So, thanks everyone for watching, and stay tuned for more videos. Thank you.